There's a photograph from 1985 that tells you everything. A young mother holding her newborn daughter on a Greek island, surrounded by unimaginable luxury. Within 3 years, that mother would be dead, and that baby would inherit billions she never asked for, and a legacy of tragedy she couldn't escape. The Onassis name meant power, shipping empires, private islands. But for the women who carried it, it meant something darker. Christina Onassis watched her entire family die before she turned 30. Her daughter Athena inherited a fortune so vast it came with armed guards and isolation so complete she'd spend her life trying to be anyone but an Onassis. This is the story of 2 generations of women who had everything money could buy and nothing it couldn't. A dynasty built on water. Christina Onassis was born on December 11th, 1950, in a Manhattan hospital, arriving into a world most people only see in movies. Her father, Aristotle Onassis, was building what would become one of the largest shipping empires on Earth, controlling tanker fleets that moved oil from the Middle East to Europe and America. Her mother, Athena Livanos, called Tina by everyone who knew her, came from Greek shipping royalty herself. Her grandfather, Stavros Livanos, had founded his own shipping dynasty. Between them, Christina's parents controlled tankers that moved oil across oceans, cargo that fed nations, money that bought islands and influenced governments. Christina's childhood wasn't normal in any sense of the word. She didn't have a bedroom in the way other children did. She had suites in multiple properties. She didn't have a house. She had residences scattered across continents, each one grander than most people's wildest dreams. Paris, Athens, Antibes, Monte Carlo, New York. Everywhere the wealthy gathered, the Onassis family had a presence. Most of her early years were spent on the family yacht, the Christina, a floating palace named after her. It had been converted from a Canadian frigate into something resembling a small luxury hotel. The bathroom fixtures were plated in gold. Original artworks by Picasso and other masters hung on the walls. There was a mosaic tiled swimming pool that could be drained and converted into a dance floor. Her playroom on the yacht was decorated by Ludwig Bemelmans, the famous artist who created the Madeleine books. Her dolls, and she had dozens of them, wore outfits designed by Christian Dior's fashion house. She rode ponies that had been gifts from the King of Saudi Arabia to her father. But wealth like that doesn't shelter you from pain. It just means the pain is different, more visible, more public. The photographs appear in more newspapers. The whispers travel further. The wounds are inflicted in front of cameras. She had an older brother, Alexander, born in 1948. He was being groomed from birth to take over the shipping empire, to be Aristotle's heir, and carry on the Onassis name. Christina adored him, followed him everywhere when they were small, looked up to him with the kind of devotion only a younger sister can have. Together, they were raised by an army of servants, governesses who taught them French and English and Greek, tutors who drilled them in mathematics and history, bodyguards who shadowed their every move. Their father was always working, always traveling, always on the phone making deals that involved millions of dollars and affected thousands of workers. He'd disappear for weeks on business trips, then return with extravagant gifts and stories of negotiations in foreign capitals. Their mother tried to give them stability, tried to create something approaching a normal family life, despite the yachts and the properties and the endless staff. But how do you create normalcy when photographers follow your children everywhere they go, and every detail of your life appears in newspapers across the world? Christina attended expensive private schools, moving from one to another as the family relocated for her father's business interests. The Hewitt School in New York, where the daughters of American millionaires learned to be proper young ladies. St. George's College in Lausanne, Switzerland, the finishing school where European aristocracy sent their children. Queen's College in London, though she only stayed there a few months. But she never stayed anywhere long enough to really belong, to make lasting friends, to feel like she was part of something beyond her family's wealth. And then the fractures in her parents' marriage became impossible to ignore. Her father's affair with Maria Callas, the opera singer, was headline news around the world. Callas was one of the most famous sopranos of her generation, celebrated for her performances in La Traviata and Tosca, and she became Aristotle's obsession. He pursued her relentlessly, showered her with jewels, took her on cruises aboard the Christina while still married to Tina. The photographs of them together appeared in every newspaper, every gossip magazine. Christina watched as photographers camped outside their homes, as gossip columns dissected her family's private business, as her mother's humiliation played out in public for the world's entertainment. Tina Livanos tried to maintain dignity through it all, tried to shield her children from the worst of it. But there's no shielding children from that kind of public spectacle. Christina was 9 years old enough to understand what the whispers meant, old enough to see the pain in her mother's eyes, old enough to hate the photographers and the reporters and her father's mistress. In 1960, when Christina was 10, her parents divorced. Tina took the children and left, moving to England where she hoped they could have some privacy. She remarried in 1961 to John Spencer Churchill, the 11th Duke of Marlborough, a British aristocrat who seemed to offer the kind of stable, respectable life Aristotle never could. Aristotle, meanwhile, continued his very public relationship with Maria Callas for years. But in 1968, he shocked the world again by marrying someone else entirely. Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of President John F. Kennedy. The marriage made international headlines, dominated news coverage for months. The former First Lady of the United States marrying a Greek shipping magnate. American royalty joining Greek wealth. Christina and Alexander both despised the match. They'd pleaded with their father not to marry Jackie. They didn't trust her, thought she was after the money, believed she could never replace their mother or even their father's beloved Callas. And despite public statements to the contrary, despite photographs of family gatherings that suggested otherwise, the relationship between Christina and her stepmother was cold, strained, marked by mutual distrust that would last until Aristotle's death. What made it worse was that Tina, Christina's mother, made her own shocking choice in 1971. She divorced the Duke of Marlborough and married Stavros Niarchos, one of the wealthiest men in Greece and Aristotle's fiercest business rival. But Stavros was also the widower of Tina's own sister, Eugenia, who had died under deeply troubling circumstances in 1970. Eugenia's death had been ruled an overdose of barbiturates, but there were whispers of abuse, questions about what had really happened that night. For Tina to marry her sister's widower, for Christina to suddenly have Stavros Niarchos as a stepfather, felt like a betrayal of everything. By the time Christina was in her early 20s, her family tree looked like something from a Greek tragedy. Her father married to Jackie Kennedy. Her mother married to her father's rival, who was also her dead aunt's widower. Her brother Alexander barely speaking to either parent. And Christina herself, caught in the middle of it all, watching her family's dysfunction play out on the world stage. Christina was 20 when she fell in love for the first time, or what she thought was love. His name was Joseph Bolker, a Los Angeles real estate developer. He was 47, divorced, with 4 daughters. He was charming, seemed to care about her for herself, rather than her money or her name. In July 1971, they married in Las Vegas. Aristotle was furious. A middle-aged American realtor wasn't the match he'd envisioned for his daughter. He wanted Christina to marry into another shipping family, to strengthen business ties, to keep the fortune within the circle. He pressured her relentlessly, made her life impossible, threatened to cut her off, made it clear that as long as she stayed married to Bolker, she was dead to him. 9 months later, Christina and Joseph divorced. She'd chosen her father over her husband, chosen the family name over her own happiness. It was a pattern that would repeat itself throughout her life. 2 years later, in January 1973, Christina's world shattered completely. Alexander was piloting a small Piaggio seaplane, taking off from Athens for what should have been a routine flight. Something went wrong. The plane crashed shortly after takeoff. Alexander suffered massive head injuries. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. He died 24 hours later, never regaining consciousness. He was 24 years old, their father's heir, the one who was supposed to inherit the shipping empire and carry on the Onassis legacy. The crash was investigated thoroughly. Inspectors examined the wreckage, interviewed witnesses, analyzed every possible cause. The official conclusion was mechanical failure, a problem with the plane's controls. But Aristotle never believed it. He convinced himself it was sabotage, that someone had tampered with the aircraft to kill his son. He hired private investigators, demanded more inquiries, refused to accept that it could have just been a tragic accident. The truth didn't matter. Alexander was gone. The golden boy, the chosen heir, the one who was supposed to make the Onassis name mean something beyond just money and ships. Gone at 24, before he could fulfill any of the promise his father had seen in him, before he could live his own life on his own terms. Aristotle was devastated in a way that changed him fundamentally. Friends said he aged 10 years in a week. The spark that had driven him to build his empire, the relentless energy that had carried him from poverty in Turkey to becoming one of the wealthiest men on earth, it all dimmed. He'd lost his son, his chosen successor, and it broke something inside him that would never heal. He turned to Christina then, began grooming her to take over the business in Alexander's place. She was 22 years old, grieving her brother, and suddenly her father expected her to step into Alexander's shoes, to become the heir she'd never been meant to be. She was sent to New York to work in the company offices on Fifth Avenue, given intensive tutorials in shipping operations by Aristotle's most trusted advisors. Brought along on business trips to learn how deals were negotiated, how captains were managed, how the vast machinery of a shipping empire functioned. But she wasn't Alexander. She knew it, and her father knew it, and the difference haunted both of them. Alexander had been raised from birth to inherit. Christina had been raised to marry well, to strengthen business alliances through strategic matches with other shipping families. The role didn't fit her, and she knew Aristotle was teaching her out of necessity, not belief in her abilities. Still, she tried. She worked long hours at the company headquarters in Monaco. She learned about tanker routes and cargo contracts, about oil futures and insurance policies, about the 1,000 details that went into running a fleet of ships. She wanted to prove to her father that she could do it, that Alexander's death hadn't doomed the family business, that the Onassis name wouldn't die with him. Then, in October 1974, just a year and a half after Alexander's death, Christina got a phone call that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her mother, Tina, had been found dead in a Paris hotel. She was only 45 years old. The official cause was listed as a heart attack, but the autopsy told a different story. Tina had died of pulmonary edema caused by an overdose of barbiturates. Whether it was accidental or intentional, no one could say for certain. Tina had been unhappy in her marriage to Stavros Niarchos. that much was clear. She'd been battling her own demons, her own grief over Alexander's death. But whether she'd meant to take too many pills or whether it was simply a tragic accident, the result was the same. Christina's mother was dead, and Christina inherited her $77 million estate along with another crushing layer of grief. Within 29 months, Christina had lost her brother and her mother, the two people who'd shared her strange, gilded childhood, who understood what it meant to be an Onassis child in a way no one else could. The press called it the Onassis curse, pointed to the pattern of tragedies that seemed to follow the family. Her family just called it unbearable. Christina, not yet 25 years old, was alone with her father in a world that seemed determined to destroy everyone she loved. And then, in March 1975, Aristotle Onassis died. Bronchial pneumonia, though really his health had been deteriorating ever since Alexander's death. He was 75 years old, and he left behind an empire estimated at $500 million. Christina inherited 55% of it. The rest went to a foundation established in Alexander's memory. Jackie Kennedy, Aristotle's widow, received $26 million in a settlement. But the bulk of the Onassis fortune, the ships and the businesses and the endless responsibility, all fell to Christina. She was 24 years old, the search for something real. Christina tried. She really did try to be what her father had wanted, to run the shipping empire, to prove herself worthy of the Onassis name. She worked at the company headquarters in Monaco, participated in negotiations, made decisions about tanker routes and cargo contracts. Some people questioned whether she was capable, whether a young woman could handle such a massive operation. But she proved them wrong. She kept the business running successfully for years. But business wasn't what Christina wanted. Money wasn't what she needed. She was desperately, achingly lonely, and she kept searching for love in places she'd never find it. 4 months after her father's death, in July 1975, Christina married Alexander Andreadis. He came from a prominent Greek shipping family, seemed like the kind of match Aristotle would have approved of. It was practically arranged, a union of shipping dynasties. It lasted 14 months. In 1978, Christina did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She married Sergei Kauzov, a Russian shipping agent she'd met during business negotiations in Moscow. He was a minor Soviet bureaucrat, modest in every way, with a glass eye he'd sometimes remove and replace in public. He lived in a 2-room apartment with his mother. He collected ties and played badminton. What Christina found in him, nobody really understood. Maybe it was that he seemed to want her for herself, not for the Onassis name or the Onassis money. Maybe it was that he treated her with a kind of dignity her previous husbands hadn't. Maybe she was just desperately trying to escape the life she'd been born into. They married in Moscow in August 1978. Christina moved into his mother's tiny apartment. It lasted 4 days before she left, though Kauzov followed her to the west, and they tried to make it work for a while longer. The marriage ended in divorce after 16 months in May 1980. Some said Christina gave him a ship as part of the settlement. Some speculated he'd been a KGB operative all along, sent to get close to her for intelligence purposes. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Through all these marriages, all these desperate attempts to find connection, Christina was battling demons nobody could see from the outside. She struggled with her weight constantly, an obsession that consumed her thoughts and energy. She'd go on crash diets, starving herself for weeks, losing dramatic amounts of weight, then gaining it all back and more when depression set in, and she'd comfort herself with food. The cycle repeated endlessly, a physical manifestation of the emotional turbulence she couldn't control. She was diagnosed with clinical depression at 30. though anyone who'd known her could have told you she'd been suffering for years. The doctors prescribed barbiturates for anxiety, amphetamines to help with weight loss, sleeping pills because she couldn't shut her mind off at night. She became addicted to all of them, taking pills to wake up, pills to function during the day, pills to sleep, pills to numb the constant ache of loneliness. She was hospitalized for overdoses more than once, though her family tried to keep those incidents quiet. The press knew anyway, or suspected, and the whispers followed her everywhere. Unstable, troubled, the poor little rich girl who couldn't handle her fortune, the tragic heiress self-destructing in slow motion. She reportedly consumed 20 cans of Coca-Cola a day, the caffeine and sugar another form of self-medication. She cried constantly, friends said, would break down without warning, overwhelmed by grief that never seemed to fade. In one interview after her father's death, she said she'd lost them all, her father, her mother, Alexander. She said she was completely alone, and despite all the money, despite the yachts and the properties and the servants and the business empire, she was absolutely right. But Christina wanted one more thing. She wanted a child, someone to love who would love her back unconditionally, someone who wouldn't leave, a final chance. In March 1984, Christina married for the 4th time. Thierry Roussel was a French pharmaceutical heir, handsome, sophisticated, managing a male modeling agency in Paris. They'd known each other since childhood, had been friends for years. For a while, it seemed like this marriage might actually work. On January 29th, 1985, Christina gave birth to a daughter. She named her Athena, after Christina's mother, carrying forward the family name in the Greek tradition. For a brief moment, Christina had what she'd always wanted, a child of her own, a family she could build on her terms. But the marriage was already falling apart. Thierry had been having an affair with a Swedish model named Marianne Landhage. He'd fathered 2 children with her while married to Christina. When Christina discovered the betrayal, it destroyed her. They separated, began divorce proceedings. Christina kept custody of Athena and threw herself into being a mother in a way she herself had never been mothered. She was determined to raise her daughter personally, not through nannies and governesses. She wanted to give Athena what she'd never had, a present parent, stability, something approaching a normal childhood. But Christina was still battling her addictions, still fighting depression, still haunted by all the losses and the failed marriages and the weight of being the last Onassis. In November 1988, Christina was visiting friends at a country estate in Tortuguitas, outside Buenos Aires, Argentina. On November 19th, her maid found her in the bathtub. She was unconscious, unresponsive. By the time they got her to a hospital, it was too late. Christina Onassis was dead at 37 years old. The autopsy found no evidence of suicide, no signs of foul play, no drug overdose. The official cause was a heart attack caused by acute pulmonary edema. Years of crash dieting, years of pill dependency, years of stress and grief had finally caught up with her. She was buried on the island of Scorpios, in the family plot alongside her father and her brother Alexander. She left behind an estate worth approximately $250 million, and she left behind a 3-year-old daughter who would now carry the full weight of the Onassis curse alone. The richest little girl in the world. Athena Onassis became, overnight, one of the wealthiest children on Earth. At 3 years old, she inherited her mother's fortune, which included islands, properties, companies, tanker fleets, bank accounts scattered across continents. The press called her the richest little girl in the world. But what she'd really inherited was isolation and tragedy. Christina hadn't trusted Thierry Roussel. Even before they divorced, she'd set up protections for Athena's inheritance. She'd appointed a board of Greek trustees to control the money until Athena turned 18. Thierry would have to get approval from this board for any money he spent on his daughter's behalf. It was a decision that would shape Athena's entire childhood. Thierry took Athena and disappeared from public view as much as he could. He'd married Marianne Landausch, the Swedish model he'd been having an affair with during his marriage to Christina in 1990, less than 2 years after Christina's death. They had 2 more children together, Eric and twin girls Sandrine and Johanna, giving Athena a half-brother and 2 half-sisters. Thierry was determined to raise Athena as normally as possible, or at least his version of normal for a child worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They settled in Switzerland, in a world that was comfortable, but not ostentatious by billionaire standards. Athena attended regular state schools rather than exclusive private academies, though calling anything about her education normal would be a stretch. She had bodyguards everywhere she went, former SAS operatives who'd been trained in anti-terrorism and kidnapping prevention. They watched her constantly, shadowed her movements, created a bubble of security around her that never let her forget she wasn't like other children. She was driven in a bulletproof limousine, the windows darkened so no one could see inside. Every route was planned in advance, varied from day to day to prevent patterns that kidnappers could exploit. Every person who came near her was vetted, watched, evaluated for threats. This was the reality for the richest little girl in the world. Money bought her safety, but it also bought her isolation. Thierry insisted she get the same pocket money as her half-siblings. She wore regular clothes, nothing designer or flashy. She was expected to do chores, to help around the house, to not act entitled despite the fortune she would inherit. On the surface, it seemed like he was trying to give her a grounded childhood, to keep her from becoming spoiled. But there was another dynamic at play. Thierry was fighting constantly with Christina's Greek trustees for access to Athena's inheritance money. Every expense he wanted to make on his daughter's behalf had to be approved by the board Christina had set up in Liechtenstein. The trustees didn't trust him, thought he was trying to use Athena's money for his own benefit, questioned every request for funds. Thierry threatened multiple times to move the family to France, where he'd have more control, where the tax laws would be more favourable to him. The battle over money became the backdrop of Athena's entire childhood. She grew up knowing she was different, knowing she had a fortune waiting for her, knowing her mother had been famous and had died young and tragic. But she also grew up with half-siblings who didn't carry the Onassis name, who weren't the focus of security teams and trustee battles, who could just be kids in a way she never could. The contrast must have been painful. To watch Eric and Sandrine and Johanna have normal childhoods while hers was consumed by guards and protocols and the weight of a name she hadn't chosen. When Athena turned 13, something shifted. She was old enough to understand what her name meant, what she represented. In a court proceeding, she stated that she felt great aversion to anything Greek. In one of her only interviews, given to an Italian magazine, she blamed all the problems on the Onassis name. She wasn't Christina's daughter, wasn't Aristotle's granddaughter. She was just a girl who happened to inherit a fortune that came with a curse, and she wanted nothing to do with it. The one thing that gave Athena joy was horses. She'd been riding since she was a small child, and in the saddle, she found something approaching peace. By 17, she'd moved to Brussels to pursue competitive show jumping, away from Switzerland, away from her father's control, starting to build a life that was hers. She met a Brazilian show jumper named Álvaro Afonso de Miranda Neto, known as Doda. He was 12 years older than her, handsome, accomplished in the equestrian world. Athena fell hard. Thierry didn't approve. He thought Doda was after Athena's money, that he was too old, that it was a mistake. He tried to tighten control over her inheritance, to keep her dependent on him for access to her own fortune. But Athena had inherited more than money from her mother. She'd inherited stubbornness too. At 18, on January 29th, 2003, Athena gained control of her inheritance. The full extent of her wealth was never publicly disclosed, but estimates put it at close to $1 billion, maybe more. She owned villas, hotels, islands in the Aegean Sea, the Olympic Tower in New York, major holdings in companies across 4 continents. She had 217 bank accounts, 87 companies, a fleet of 38 tankers. She also inherited the right to control the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation, the charitable organization her grandfather had established in her uncle's memory. But when she turned 21, the foundation's board changed the charter. They removed Athena's automatic right to become chairman. They argued she knew nothing of Greek culture, didn't speak Greek, had no connection to her heritage. She had no right, they said, to head such an important Greek institution. Athena never took her intended role at the foundation. The rejection stung, reinforced everything she already felt about being an Onassis. The name was a burden, not a legacy. The money was a weight, not a gift. Searching for normal. On December 3rd, 2005, Athena married Doda Miranda in São Paulo, Brazil. It was a lavish ceremony attended by 700 guests, mostly Brazilian VOIPs and people from the equestrian community. Athena's father and stepmother weren't there. The couple asked guests to donate to charity instead of giving gifts. After the wedding, Athena took the name Athena Onassis de Miranda. She moved to Brazil, invested heavily in a ranch there, devoted herself to show jumping. She and Doda traveled the world competing in elite equestrian events, building a life that seemed, from the outside, almost normal. They jointly owned AD Sport Horses, a breeding and training business in Belgium. For 11 years, they competed together, built a business together, seemed to make it work. Athena rarely appeared in public outside the equestrian world. She didn't give interviews. She stayed out of tabloids. She was doing what she'd always wanted, being anyone but an Onassis heiress. And then, in 2016, everything fell apart. A Belgian woman who'd worked as an escort approached a family friend, Alexis Manthiekis, with a file. It contained evidence of an 8-year relationship with Doda, hotel bills, flight receipts, photographs. The woman was tired of Doda's behavior, tired of being a secret, and she wanted to expose him. Manthiekis published the details in his book, The Storm in the Eye of Athena Onassis. The revelations shattered Athena's world. Her husband, the man she'd fought her father to be with, the man she'd built a life with, had been serially unfaithful for nearly their entire marriage. They separated immediately. Divorce negotiations began, complicated and bitter. Doda challenged the prenuptial agreement, demanded alimony, fought over custody of jointly owned horses. The proceedings dragged through the courts in Antwerp, Belgium, where they'd been living. The divorce was finally settled in November 2017. Athena, at 32 years old, was alone again. She moved to Greece, perhaps trying to connect with the heritage she'd always rejected, perhaps just trying to escape the wreckage of another failed marriage. The weight of silence. Today, Athena Onassis is 40 years old. She lives in Belgium, mostly, though she still has properties scattered across the globe. She competes occasionally in show jumping events, though not as frequently as she once did. She suffered a serious spinal injury in a fall from her horse in 2012. And while she recovered enough to represent Greece in the 2013 European Championships, and the 2014 World Championships, the injury changed her relationship with the sport. She's been spotted at a few social events over the years. A wedding in Monte Carlo in 2021, where she was practically unrecognizable in the crowd. A horse show here and there. But for the most part, she's vanished from public life as completely as someone with her name and wealth can vanish. She doesn't have social media, doesn't give interviews, doesn't appear in tabloids unless someone manages to snap a photograph of her at an equestrian event. She's accomplished what Christina never could. She's made herself invisible. But what kind of life is that? To have billions of dollars and spend your days hiding from anyone who might recognize your name? To be the last surviving member of one of the 20th century's most famous families and want nothing to do with that legacy? The Onassis fortune is still there, managed by trustees and advisors, generating income from shipping contracts and property holdings and business investments. But Athena seems to take no joy in it, no pride in the empire her grandfather built or the business her mother tried to run. She never had a choice about being born into the Onassis family. She never asked to inherit billions. She was 3 years old when her mother died, too young to remember her clearly, too young to understand what had been lost. She grew up knowing Christina only through photographs and stories, raised by a father who'd betrayed her mother, surrounded by half-siblings who shared her father, but not her name or her burden. The foundation that was supposed to be her birthright rejected her. The marriage she fought for ended in betrayal. The heritage she inherited feels more like a curse than a blessing. And the money that was supposed to give her everything has given her nothing but reasons to hide. A legacy of loss. 2 generations of Onassis women, Christina and Athena. Mother and daughter separated by death, bound together by money they never asked for and tragedies they couldn't escape. Christina lost everyone in her family within a few devastating years. She married 4 times, searching for love, for connection, for something real in a world where everything could be bought except happiness. She battled depression and addiction, and the crushing loneliness of being the last Onassis. She died at 37, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter and a fortune that felt more like a punishment than a gift. Athena inherited that fortune and that pain. She spent her childhood surrounded by bodyguards, her adolescence rejecting everything Greek, her adulthood trying to build a normal life in a world where normal wasn't available to someone with her name. She married a man she thought she could trust and learned, like her mother before her, that trust and money don't always coexist. The Onassis shipping empire still operates. The tankers still move cargo across oceans. The businesses still generate profits. The foundation still funds charitable causes in Alexander's name. But the family that built it all is gone. Alexander dead in a plane crash at 24. Christina dead of a heart attack at 37. Aristotle dead at 75, having lost everything that mattered more than money. And Athena, the last survivor, living in isolation by choice, competing in show-jumping events under a name she seems to barely claim, avoiding the spotlight, avoiding the legacy, avoiding everything that comes with being an Onassis except the money she can't give away. There's something profoundly sad about it all, the way wealth that was supposed to mean power and freedom became a prison, the way a name that was supposed to open doors became a reason to hide, the way billions of dollars couldn't prevent tragedy or buy happiness or keep a family together. Christina spoke about her losses in the years before she died. She'd tell anyone who'd listen that she'd lost everyone, that she had no one left, that the money meant nothing, and she was right. All the ships and the islands and the properties couldn't bring back her brother or her mother or her father, couldn't make her marriages work, couldn't lift the depression or break the addiction or fill the void. Athena doesn't cry in public. She doesn't say anything in public. She's learned from her mother's pain that visibility brings suffering, that being an Onassis means being watched and judged and never given the space to be human. So she's made herself as invisible as possible, built walls so high that even with all her money, she's utterly alone. 2 women, 2 generations, billions of dollars, complete isolation, the same story playing out again with different details, the same tragedy with new names. Christina searching for love she'd never find. Athena hiding from a legacy she never wanted. And the Onassis name, once synonymous with power and glamour and the heights of wealth, now represents something else entirely. Loss, loneliness. The kind of suffering money can't prevent and fame makes worse. The curse, if there ever was such a thing, wasn't that the Onassis family died young. It was that they lived long enough to understand that everything they had couldn't give them what they needed, that the fortune that was supposed to be their inheritance was really their burden, that being rich and being happy are sometimes mutually exclusive, especially when your wealth comes with expectations and tragedies and a name that weighs more than any bank account. Christina tried to fight it. She married and divorced and married again. She ran the business and partied on Scorpios and gave birth to a daughter she hoped would break the cycle. But in the end, the weight was too much. The pills and the Coca-Cola and the crash diets and the depression and the relentless loneliness of being the last Onassis. It killed her at 37. Athena learned from that. She's chosen isolation over the fight. She's chosen invisibility over the struggle. She's the richest woman most people have never heard of, and that seems to be exactly what she wants. To be forgotten, to be left alone, to be anyone but an Onassis. And in a way, that's the saddest ending of all. That the conclusion to this story of shipping billions and global empires and legendary names is a 40-year-old woman who just wants to be left alone with her horses, who spent her entire life trying to escape the one thing she can never escape, being Aristotle Onassis's granddaughter. The decline of the Onassis sisters isn't a story of financial collapse or business failures. The money is still there. The empire still operates. The decline is human, personal. The slow erosion of 2 women crushed under the weight of expectations and tragedies, and a name that promised everything and delivered nothing but pain. Christina and Athena, mother and daughter, both searching for something money couldn't buy, both learning, in their own ways, that being an Onassis heir meant being profoundly, devastatingly alone. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. There's a photograph from 1966. Grace Kelly stands in the gardens of Monaco with her 3 children gathered around her. Caroline, the eldest at 9, looks directly at the camera with an almost knowing expression. 8-year-old Albert squints in the Mediterranean sun. And little Stephanie, barely a year old, sits in her mother's arms. They look like perfection itself. A fairy tale made real. But fairy tales have a way of turning dark when nobody's looking. The world knew Grace Kelly as Hollywood royalty, who became actual royalty. What the world didn't know was how much her children would pay for that transformation. How the weight of her legacy would press down on them in ways nobody could have predicted. 3 children, 3 completely different paths, and all of them marked by tragedy in ways that would have broken lesser people. The golden girl who lost everything twice. Caroline Louise Marguerite was born on January 23, 1957, less than a year after her parents' storybook wedding. From her first breath, she was heir presumptive to the throne of Monaco. For 14 months, she was the future of the Grimaldi dynasty. Then Albert arrived and changed everything. But that's how it always was for Caroline. Almost perfect, almost enough, almost the one who mattered most. Growing up in the prince's palace wasn't the fantasy you might imagine. The marble floors and the Mediterranean views and the servants attending to every need. Yes, all of that was real. But so was the loneliness, the formal dinners where children were expected to be seen and not heard, the constant awareness that every move was being watched, judged, catalogued for future reference. Years later, Caroline would say something that surprised people. She and Albert were probably closer to their nanny, Maureen Wood, than to their parents. Think about that for a moment. A princess admitting that the hired help raised her instead of her movie star mother and royal father. It's the kind of truth that shatters the carefully maintained illusion. Maureen was the key figure in their lives, Caroline said. The one who was actually there. The one who tucked them in at night and listened to their problems and made them feel like children instead of chess pieces in a royal game. Grace was busy being Princess Grace. The charity galas, the foundation work, the carefully constructed image of the perfect princess who had given up Hollywood for love. She'd established the Princess Grace Foundation in 1964 to support local artisans. She'd founded Aimade Mondiale, an organization promoting children's rights that eventually gained consultative status with UNICEF and UNESCO. All worthy causes. All time-consuming. All taking her away from the children who needed more than a beautiful mother who appeared for photo opportunities. Caroline learned early that image mattered more than almost anything else. She learned to smile for the cameras, to stand up straight, to never let anyone see what she was really thinking or feeling. It's a skill that would serve her well in the years to come, when she would need it most. She was brilliant, this eldest daughter of Grace and Rainier. She took lessons in ballet, piano, and flute as a child. She received her French baccalaureate with honours in 1974. She spent time at the Sorbonne, where she studied philosophy with minors in psychology and biology. She spoke 5 languages fluently: French, English, German, Spanish, Italian. She was everything a modern princess should be. Educated, cultured, poised. Beautiful in that particular way that made people think of her mother, but different enough to be her own person. She spent childhood summers in Philadelphia with her maternal grandparents, John and Margaret Kelly. She even attended Camp Onassis in the Poconos Mountains when she was 14. The United States Secret Service protected her there, though her parents didn't know it at the time. For a few weeks each summer, she got to be something close to normal, close enough to see what life might have been like if she'd been born to different parents in a different place. But normal was never going to be Caroline's fate. And then she met Philippe Junot. He was a Parisian banker, sophisticated, charming, and significantly older than Caroline. The kind of man who knew all the right things to say and all the right places to be seen. He moved in the highest circles of French society. He had connections, money, style. Prince Rainier didn't approve. He saw something in Junot that Caroline, at 21, couldn't or wouldn't see. Grace had her doubts too. But how do you tell your daughter that the man she loves isn't worthy of her? How do you make someone see what they're determined not to notice? Caroline was in love, or at least she thought she was. Maybe it was rebellion. Maybe it was the need to prove she could make her own choices. Maybe it was genuine affection that blinded her to the warning signs. On June 28th and 29th, 1978, she married Junot in both a civil and religious ceremony at Monaco. She was 21. He was 38. 17 years separated them, a detail that had troubled her parents from the start. The wedding was spectacular in the way only a royal wedding can be. 650 guests. Hollywood stars like Ava Gardner, Cary Grant, and Frank Sinatra. Caroline wore an embroidered wedding dress with semi-sheer sleeves by Marc Bohan for Dior. Her floral headdress was photographed from every angle. The world watched and sighed at the romance of it all. The marriage lasted 2 years. 2 years of what the press delicately called incompatibility. They were kind, the press. They knew more than they printed. What they didn't write about were the nights Junot spent at Parisian nightclubs without his wife, the reports of him with other women, the arguments behind closed palace doors, the slow, painful realization that this wasn't the marriage she'd hoped for. Caroline had wanted independence. What she got was humiliation. Public humiliation, at that, because nothing in a princess's life is truly private. She filed for divorce in October 1980. She was 23 years old and already knew what it felt like to have her private heartbreak played out in newspapers around the world. Every detail analyzed, every emotion dissected, every failure magnified 1,000 times over. The Catholic Church wouldn't grant her an annulment until 1992. 12 years. For 12 years, in the eyes of the Church, she was still married to a man she'd divorced. It meant she couldn't have a religious wedding ceremony if she remarried. It meant her future children would be born outside the Church's blessing, at least technically. But Caroline had already learned that the rules didn't always match reality, that sometimes you had to choose between what other people wanted and what you needed to survive. Philippe Junot would go on to remarry and have more children. He lived a long life, passing away in Madrid in January 2026 at the age of 85. But for Caroline, that first marriage remained a painful chapter. A lesson learned the hard way about love and independence and the price of both. But the real tragedy was still ahead. She just didn't know it yet. The boat race that changed everything. In 1983, Caroline met Stefano Casiraghi at a nightclub in Monte Carlo. He was different from Junot in every way that mattered. Younger than her, instead of older. An Italian businessman from a wealthy family in Como, yes, but also a man with an adventurous spirit. He raced powerboats on Lake Como, fast ones, dangerous ones. The Casiraghi family had money from heating and air conditioning equipment. Stefano had grown up on the family estate, Villa Cigogne, in Fino Mornasco. He'd attended Milan's Bocconi University, but left without a degree to work in the family business. Real estate, retail export. He was building his own empire, not living off someone else's. And he genuinely seemed to love Caroline. Not Caroline the princess. Not Caroline the daughter of Grace Kelly. Just Caroline. They were married on December 29th, 1983, in a civil ceremony in the Hall of Mirrors at the Prince's Palace. Caroline was already 3 months pregnant. She stood under a portrait of her late mother for the ceremony, a reminder of everything she'd lost 2 years earlier. Her annulment from Junot still hadn't come through. It would take until 1992, but Caroline didn't care anymore. She had found something real, something that felt like it might actually last. Their son Andrea was born on June 8, 1984, at the Princess Grace Hospital Center. Daughter Charlotte arrived on August 3, 1986. Son Pierre came on September 5, 1987. 3 children in less than 4 years. A real family, growing up with a father who was present, who came home at night, who loved their mother. For 7 years, Caroline had what she'd been searching for since childhood. Stability, love, the sense that maybe, just maybe, the fairy tale could be real after all. Stefano's business ventures flourished. He wasn't just the prince consort. He was a successful businessman in his own right. By 1990, he was chairman of Cojafar France, the French subsidiary of an Italian construction group owned by Fiat. He held a 52% interest in Engaco, which owned about 3,000 apartments in Monaco, and was building a $160 million apartment complex. He was wealthy, powerful, a devoted father and husband. He and Caroline had even competed together in the grueling Paris-Dakar rally race in 1985, though they had to drop out after their vehicle crashed in the Algerian desert. But Stefano never gave up powerboat racing. It was in his blood, part of who he was. Caroline understood that. She knew you couldn't ask someone to give up a fundamental part of themselves, even when you were afraid every time they climbed into one of those boats. On October 3rd, 1990, Stefano was defending his Class 1 World Powerboat Championship title in the World Offshore Championships, being held off the coast of Monaco. His boat, the Pinot di Pinot, was a 42-foot catamaran with two 800-horsepower engines. Sleek, powerful, fast enough to hit 125 miles per hour on open water. The weather conditions were described as normal that morning. Just another race. Just another day of doing what Stefano loved. The day before, Stefano and his co-pilot Patrice Innocenti had stopped during the race to help rescue another pilot whose boat had caught fire. It cost them time. Instead of starting in first position for the second leg on October 3rd, they started in 8th. But they were making up the lost time, pulling ahead, moving into first place. 30 minutes into the race, they hit a wave at 93 miles per hour. The physics of it are brutal. A 42-foot boat weighing 5 tons hitting water at that speed. The catamaran flipped completely over. Innocenti, who was driving, was thrown clear into the water. Stefano, strapped in his seat, wasn't. The full force of the boat slamming into the water came down on him. Fellow racer Alberto Brombin was first to reach the scene. What he saw would stay with him forever. Stefano was stuck in the cockpit of his sinking boat, crushed with such tremendous force that his red helmet had been ripped off his head. The 2-engine, 5-ton boat sank immediately, pulling Stefano down with it. Innocenti was rescued from the water, injured but alive. They rushed him to the Princess Grace Hospital, the hospital named after Caroline's mother, the hospital where Caroline's children had been born. Race organizers said Stefano must have died instantly. He wouldn't have seen it coming, wouldn't have had time to be afraid. At that speed, trapped under the boat, death would have been immediate. He was 30 years old. He'd planned to retire after this race, just one more championship to defend, then he was done with the danger. One more race. That's all it was supposed to be. Caroline was in Paris when she got the word. The call that every spouse of a racer dreads. The call she'd probably been half expecting every time Stefano climbed into one of those boats. She rushed back to Monaco, dressed in mourning black, her face a carefully composed mask that hid everything the cameras couldn't be allowed to see. She'd learned that skill from her mother, how to smile when your heart is breaking, how to stand up straight when you want to collapse, how to keep the world from seeing what's really happening inside. How do you explain to children that young that their father isn't coming home? Andrea was 6 years old, Charlotte was 4, Pierre was 3. How do you tell them that the man who tucked them in at night and played with them in the palace gardens is gone forever? 8 years and 3 weeks after her mother's death, Caroline faced another unimaginable loss. She was 33, a mother of 3, and now a widow. Stefano's funeral was held at Monaco's Cathedral of St. Nicholas, the same cathedral where Princess Grace's funeral had been held 8 years earlier. Caroline stood with her 3 young children, her brother Albert, her sister Stephanie, her father Rainier, all of them in black, all of them trying to hold themselves together. The cathedral was full of mourners. But Caroline was alone in the way that truly mattered. Alone with her grief and her children, and the future she now had to face without the man she'd built it with. In the years that followed, Caroline would throw herself into the work her mother had left behind. She became president of Aide Mondiale. She took over her mother's role in numerous charities and foundations. She became Monaco's de facto First Lady, standing in for her aging father at state functions. She raised her 3 children largely alone. Andrea, Charlotte, and Pierre grew up without their father, but they grew up surrounded by love. Caroline made sure of that. Whatever else she couldn't give them, she gave them that. In 1999, she married for the 3rd time, Prince Ernst August of Hanover. It was a private civil ceremony. She was 42. Ernst August brought his own complications. He'd been married before and had 2 sons. He and Caroline had a daughter together, Princess Alexandra, born in 1999. The marriage gave Caroline the title of Princess of Hanover. It gave her another chance at happiness. But the ghosts of her past were always there. The husband who died in a boat race, the mother who died in a car crash, the losses that shaped everything that came after. People who know Caroline well say she carries the weight of those losses still, the kind that comes from knowing how quickly everything can change, how fragile happiness really is, how the people you love can be there one moment and gone the next. But there's more to the story. There always is. The whispers nobody wanted to hear. Stefano's closest friend, Giancarlo Miorin, said something that sent shockwaves through Monaco's elite. He was convinced Stefano had been killed, deliberately. A week before the fatal race, Stefano had confided to Miorin that he'd received death threats, not the first ones either. Stefano told his friend that he was frightened, that someone was out to get him. 4 years earlier, in 1986, one of Stefano's boats had mysteriously exploded, the boat he was expected to pilot. At the last minute, he'd decided to watch from another vessel. His co-pilot, Innocenti, was driving when the boat blew up. If Stefano hadn't changed his mind, he would have died then. A few months before that explosion, someone had run Stefano off the road. He believed it was deliberate, an attempt on his life. The theories pointed to Stefano's business dealings. He had made himself wealthy through wheeling and dealing with some shady investors. The wealthier he became, the less he needed their money. And when he refused to continue playing ball with certain underworld characters who flocked to Monaco's gambling empire, they became enraged. There were rumors about drug overlords angry at the Grimaldi family's efforts to kick dealers out of the principality. Suspicions that Stefano's boat had been tampered with. Prince Rainier ordered the boat raised from 3,000 feet below the waves where it had settled, looking for evidence of sabotage. They never found any. Or at least, they never said they did. The investigation went nowhere. The death was ruled an accident, but the questions never stopped. For Caroline, it didn't matter whether it was murder or misfortune. Her husband was gone. Her children's father was gone. And she had to figure out how to keep moving forward while the entire world watched. A sister's burden. When Grace Kelly's car went over that cliff on September 13th, 1982, Princess Stephanie was in the passenger seat. She was 17 years old, about to start school in Paris in 2 days, looking forward to a new chapter of her life. Instead, she got a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. They'd spent the weekend at the family's country home, Rock Agel, in the hills above Monaco. Grace and Stephanie had tickets for a train to Paris that morning. The plan was simple. Drive down to Monaco, catch the train, get Stephanie settled in her new school. Grace's chauffeur brought the 11-year-old metallic green Rover 3500 out and offered to drive. But Grace had dresses and boxes in the back seat. There wasn't room for 3 people with all the luggage. Grace insisted she could drive. The chauffeur tried to persuade her to let him drive and come back for the dresses later. But Grace said no, she would handle it. So Grace got behind the wheel, and Stephanie climbed into the passenger seat. At about 10 a.m., they pulled away from Rock Aigle. The road winds down from the farm into La Turbie, then down to the Moyenne Corniche, on a road called the D37. About 2 miles from La Turbie, there's an especially steep bend. You have to brake hard and steer carefully to follow the road 150 degrees to the right, a hairpin turn that locals call Devil's Curse. A motorist driving behind them noticed the Rover swerving erratically back and forth across the road. He honked several times, thinking the driver must be drunk or falling asleep. Then the car suddenly accelerated, over 50 miles per hour, heading straight toward that hairpin curve. The Rover crashed through the stone barrier and went over the edge. It somersaulted 120 feet down the mountainside, crashing through tree branches, bouncing off the slope, tossing Grace and Stephanie around inside like rag dolls. When it finally stopped, a local gardener heard the crash and ran to help. He found the wrecked car near the bottom of the hill, resting against a pile of rocks. Stephanie had managed to pull herself out through the driver's side window. The passenger door was completely smashed in. She was yelling for help to get her mother out. For years afterward, people whispered that Stephanie had been driving, that she didn't have a license, that she'd been behind the wheel when it happened. The rumors were fed by the fact that Stephanie had escaped through the driver's side. Why would she do that if she'd been in the passenger seat? It took 20 years before Stephanie finally broke her silence about that day. 20 years of carrying the weight of those whispers. 20 years of people believing she'd killed her mother. She wasn't driving. She was thrown around inside the car just like her mother. The passenger door was completely smashed in. She had to crawl out through the driver's side because it was the only way out. That's all. That's the simple, tragic truth. But the real truth is somehow worse than the rumors. Stephanie remembers every minute of the crash. She's said so in interviews, though she didn't talk about it for years, couldn't talk about it. The trauma was too fresh, too raw. Her mother was trying to stop the car. Grace kept saying the brakes didn't work, that she couldn't stop. She was in complete panic. Stephanie tried frantically to pull on the handbrake. She tried everything. Nothing helped. Grace had been complaining of a headache that morning. Then she seemed to black out for a moment. The car started to swerve. Then it went full speed ahead over the cliff. Days later, doctors would find evidence that Grace had suffered what they called a cerebral vascular incident, a minor stroke. It could have been relatively mild if it had happened at home. She might have sat down and felt better soon. But in a car, on a winding mountain road, it was fatal. The impact of the crash caused a second hemorrhage, severe head injuries, fractured ribs, broken collarbone and thigh. Grace was taken to Monaco Hospital, later renamed the Princess Grace Hospital Centre in her honour. But the hospital wasn't well equipped for these types of injuries. Surgery was performed on her lungs to stop internal bleeding, but the brain damage was too severe. She never regained consciousness. For the first day, the palace issued statements saying Grace was stable, suffering from broken bones, but stable. Even her brother John Kelly in Philadelphia was told she was out of danger. The statements were administrative, not medical. Nobody wanted to admit how bad it really was. Princess Stephanie was taken to the same hospital, treated for a fractured vertebra in her neck. She wasn't told her mother had died for 2 days after the crash. 2 days of lying in a hospital bed, recovering from her injuries, thinking her mother was recovering too. When they finally told her, she wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. She was still hospitalized, still being treated for her injuries. So Stephanie missed it, missed saying goodbye. Nearly 100 million people watched on television as Prince Rainier, Princess Caroline, and Prince Albert walked behind Grace's casket to the Cathedral of Our Lady Immaculate. But Stephanie, who'd been there in the car with her mother in those final moments, wasn't there. The guilt would eat at her for years. Survivor's guilt, mixed with the rumors that she'd been the one driving, mixed with the knowledge that she'd been unable to save her mother, that she'd pulled on that handbrake, and it hadn't been enough. Years later, she would talk about the anger she felt, the sense of injustice. Why had she survived when logically she should have died too? The car fell 120 feet. It was completely destroyed. How had she walked away with just a fractured vertebra? But then she decided there must have been a reason. If she'd been kept alive, it was for a reason. She had a place in this world. She had to find it. Finding it would take her down some paths that shocked the world and disappointed her family. But maybe that was the point. Maybe finding your place means refusing to be what everyone expects you to be. The bodyguard and the scandal. Stephanie was young and beautiful and rebellious. After her mother's death, she seemed determined to prove she wasn't going to be the perfect princess everyone expected. In 1983, she started an apprenticeship at Christian Dior. She became a model, appearing on the covers of Vogue and Vanity Fair. In 1986, she launched a swimwear line called Pool Position. That same year, she released a pop single that became an international hit. The song was called Ouragan in French, Irresistible in English. It sold over 2 million copies. But her personal life was where the real drama unfolded. Daniel Ducrouet started as a trainee in Monaco's police force in 1986. Within 2 years, he was appointed a palace bodyguard. In 1991, Prince Rainier assigned him to accompany Stephanie on a tour to promote her album. They fell in love. Or at least, they fell into something that looked like love from the outside. Stephanie gave birth to their son, Louis, on November 26, 1992. Their daughter, Pauline, arrived on May 4, 1994. They finally married on July 1, 1995, in a civil ceremony. Stephanie wore what would go down as one of the least popular wedding dresses in royal history, but she didn't care what people thought. The marriage lasted just over a year. In August 1996, Italian magazines published photographs that would end the marriage overnight. Intimate photos of Ducrouet with a Belgian woman named Muriel Houteman. She'd been crowned Miss Nude Belgium the year before. The pictures showed them together, unclothed, at a villa on the French Riviera. Ducrouet would later claim he'd been set up, that Houteman had drugged his champagne, that it was a conspiracy involving a photographer who wanted to make money from the scandal. A French court would eventually agree with him, giving suspended sentences to Houteman and the photographers involved. But by then, the damage was done. Stephanie filed for divorce on September 16, 1996. The divorce was finalized on October 4th. She was 31 years old, with 2 young children and another failed relationship behind her. And she still hadn't learned to avoid complicated situations, from elephant trainers to acrobats. In 2001, Stephanie began a relationship with Franco Ni, a married elephant trainer with a circus. She moved into his circus caravan with her 3 children. Yes, 3. Her third child, Camille, had been born on July 15, 1998. The father was another bodyguard, Jean-Raymond Gottlieb, though Stephanie never identified him on the birth certificate. Because her parents never married, Camille isn't in the line of succession to the throne. The relationship with Camille ended in 2002. Stephanie and her children moved back to Monaco. Then came Aidens Lopez Perez, a Portuguese acrobat from Canaille's circus. On September 12, 2003, Stephanie married him in a private ceremony in Switzerland. Neither family was present. She was reportedly pregnant at the time. The marriage ended in divorce on November 24, 2004, 14 months, even shorter than her first marriage. For a while after that, people wondered what Princess Stephanie would do next. How many more times would she chase something that looked like happiness, only to have it fall apart? But then, something changed. Stephanie threw herself into humanitarian work, real, meaningful work. In 2003, she created Fight AIDS Monaco to support people living with HIV and combat the social stigma around the disease. In 2006, she became a UNAIDS ambassador. She's been president of the International Circus Festival of Monte Carlo since the 1980s, attending faithfully every year. Her brother Albert said the elephants that Knie had given her provided a different understanding of wildlife, that she needed that kind of project when her children started to leave home. Both elephants have since died, but they gave Stephanie something she desperately needed: purpose beyond the scandals and the headlines. The prince who couldn't keep secrets. Prince Albert was born on March 14, 1958, the only son of Grace and Rainier, the heir to the throne, the future of the Grimaldi dynasty. He went to Amherst College in Massachusetts, where he studied political science. He competed in bobsled at 5 Winter Olympics. He seemed like the steady one, the reliable one, the one who would carry on the family name with dignity. When his father died on April 6, 2005, Albert became Prince Albert II of Monaco. The transition should have been smooth, the bachelor prince taking his rightful place. Then the secrets started coming out. In May 2005, just weeks after his father's death, a former Air France flight attendant named Nicole Coste went public. She claimed her son, Alexandre, born on August 24, 2003, was Prince Albert's child. She said she'd been living in Albert's Paris apartment, receiving an allowance from him, while pretending to be the girlfriend of one of his friends to maintain discretion. On July 6, 2005, just days before his official enthronement on July 12th, Albert's lawyer confirmed it was true. Alexandre was his biological son, but there was more. In June 2006, after years of legal battles, Albert publicly acknowledged another child, Jasmine Grace Grimaldi, born on March 4, 1992, to Tamara Rotolo, an American waitress he'd met while she was on vacation on the Côte d'Azur. Albert's name had been on Yasmin's birth certificate since her birth, but he'd denied paternity for 14 years, until a DNA test proved otherwise. Yasmin had grown up in Palm Springs, California. She was 14 years old, having a normal day at school, when Albert's lawyers announced she'd been formally recognized as a member of a billionaire royal family halfway around the world. Under Monaco's constitution, neither Yasmin nor Alexandre can inherit the throne because they weren't born in lawful marriage. Albert made that very clear when he confirmed paternity, but they can inherit part of his billion-dollar fortune. In space of a year, the world learned that the playboy prince who had just become Monaco's ruler had 2 illegitimate children with 2 different women. The revelations damaged his reputation, made people wonder what else might be hiding in his past. In 2011, Albert married Charlene Wittstock, a former Olympic swimmer from South Africa. She became Princess Charlene of Monaco. In December 2014, they had twins, Princess Gabriella and Prince Jacques. Jacques, born 2 minutes after his sister, is the heir to the throne. But the paternity claims didn't stop. In 2020, a Brazilian woman came forward claiming Albert had fathered her daughter, born in July 2005. She said they'd traveled the world together in the early 2000s. that she'd met Vladimir Putin with Albert during a private meeting. Albert's lawyers called it a hoax. The case is still unresolved. The question people ask is how much Princess Charlene knows. How much she knew before the wedding. There were reports that she tried to leave Monaco just days before the ceremony in 2011, that her passport was confiscated, that she was convinced to go through with it. When photos surfaced in 2020 showing Charlene with a radical new haircut, half her head shaved, people wondered if it was her way of rebelling, of showing the world she wasn't happy playing the role of perfect princess, the weight of a legacy. Caroline eventually found happiness again, or something close to it. In 1999, she married Prince Ernst August of Hanover. They had a daughter together, Princess Alexandra, born in 1999. The marriage brought Caroline the title of Princess of Hanover. But happiness for the Grimaldis always seems temporary. Her son Pierre married Beatrice Borromeo in 2015. They have 3 children. Her daughter Charlotte had a son with French comedian Gad Elmaleh, then later married producer Dimitri Rassam and had another son. Her eldest son, Andrea, married Tatiana Santo Domingo. They also have 3 children. Caroline is a grandmother many times over now. She's devoted her life to the charitable work her mother started. She's president of the Prince Pierre Foundation, promoting contemporary art. She attends to her royal duties with the same grace her mother once showed. But people who know her say there's a sadness that never quite leaves her eyes. 2 tragedies that shaped everything that came after. The mother who died when she was 25. The husband who died when she was 33. Stephanie's children have grown up now. Louis and Pauline have carved out their own lives, staying mostly out of the spotlight. Camille has become a model and social media personality. Stephanie continues her humanitarian work, particularly her efforts with Fight AIDS Monaco. Prince Albert rules Monaco with Princess Charlene at his side. Their twins are growing up in the same palace where their father and aunt and uncle grew up, learning the same lessons about duty and image and the price of being born into royalty. Jasmine and Alexandre, the acknowledged but illegitimate children, have found their own paths. Jasmine is an actress and humanitarian, working with the United Nations and running her own charity. Alexandra is studying business in England, insisting that his name is Grimaldi, not Coste or Coste Grimaldi, regardless of what the press calls him. What Grace left behind. There's another photograph. This one is more recent. It shows Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie together at an official function. They're older now. Caroline is in her 60s, Albert approaching 70, Stephanie in her late 50s. They're smiling for the cameras, doing what they've been trained to do their entire lives. But if you look closely, you can see something else. The weight of everything they've carried. Everything they've survived. Grace Kelly's shadow still falls across all 3 of them. They've spent their entire adult lives trying to live up to an impossible standard. The perfect princess who gave up everything for love. Except that wasn't the whole truth, was it? Grace Kelly had affairs during her marriage. She was unhappy being trapped in Monaco, away from her acting career. She tried to return to Hollywood, to film Hitchcock's Marnie, but Rainier wouldn't allow it. She joined the board of 20th Century Fox in 1976, desperately trying to find a way back into the world she'd left behind. The fairy tale wasn't quite as perfect as everyone believed, and her children paid the price for that imperfect perfection. Caroline lost her husband to a boat race that maybe wasn't an accident. She raised 3 children largely alone, taking on her mother's duties at the palace while grieving in whatever private moments she could steal. Stephanie survived a crash that killed her mother, then spent years trying to escape the weight of that survival through relationships that couldn't bear the burden she was carrying. Albert inherited a throne and $1 billion fortune, but he also inherited the expectation that he would be perfect. When those two secret children came to light, it shattered the carefully constructed image. He's never quite recovered that shine. 3 children, 3 completely different paths through tragedy. But here's what's remarkable. They're still here, still doing the work, still showing up for the duties they were born into. Caroline with her foundations and her quiet dignity. Stephanie with her humanitarian efforts and her refusal to apologize for who she is. Albert ruling Monaco and trying to be a better father to his legitimate children than the father he was to his illegitimate ones. Grace Kelly's legacy isn't just the films she made or the charitable work she did. It's these 3 people who survived everything that being her children brought down on them. The accidents and the scandals and the endless, relentless scrutiny of a world that wanted them to be perfect but couldn't look away when they were human. They're not perfect. None of them are. But they're survivors. And in the end, that might be the greatest tribute to their mother. Not that they lived up to an impossible ideal, but that they endured when that ideal proved to be a beautiful lie. The fairy tale ended on September 14th, 1982, when Grace Kelly died at 52 years old. What came after wasn't a fairy tale at all. It was 3 people learning to live with loss and grief and the impossible weight of other people's expectations. They're still learning, still carrying that weight, still showing up day after day to play the roles they were born into. Because that's what being Grace Kelly's children means. You don't get to stop. You don't get to walk away. You carry it all, the good and the bad, the love and the loss, the fairy tale and the nightmare that came after. And somehow, despite everything, you keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.